Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being the early birds at this session and showing up at 9 o'clock. I'm Greg Selinger. I'm the Premier of the province of Manitoba in the country of Canada. We're in the geographic center of the country. I hate to do this, but north of Minnesota, for those of you that have an American point of view of reference. We are a population of 1.2 million people in a territory of 645,000 square acres, so, which is to say we're not overpopulated by any way, shape, or form when you compare it to this country of India, for sure. I'm going to talk just briefly, because I have 10 minutes, about what we've been doing to deal with climate change and adapting to climate change. And I just want to start by saying some of the obvious, that in each jurisdiction, the approach we take will obviously have to be varied and specific to the conditions that we're dealing with, and resources is obviously a big part of it, but also the types of communities we have, the types of normal environments that we're experiencing. In our case, we're a winter community for sure. It's about 30 below in Winnipeg right now as I speak, and so it's a very chilly time there right now, and we have winter roads. And one of the things we've noticed with climate change is that winter roads just aren't able to do the job anymore. They're not open enough in a regular season to provide essential goods and services to remote communities. So we have to do something about that. We also notice that we're getting more extreme weather events. We're at the bottom of about 5 watersheds. What used to be called Lake Agassiz. The Red River flows into Manitoba. The Saskatchewan River flows into Manitoba. The Winnipeg River flows into Manitoba. And all those rivers flow into the south of the province, up through the 11th largest freshwater lake in the world, into the Nelson River and into the Hudson Bay at the northern end of the province. So we are a province of water with 100,000 lakes. And we've seen more serious and extreme weather events, including the worst flood we've ever had in 2011, which evacuated thousands of people from their homes during the course of that and left us a legacy of repairs that we had to do to deal with that. I also would argue that as we go forward on climate change adaptation, that subnational governments will play a leading role, whether they're provincial governments or state governments or municipal governments. Subnational governments will play a leading role because they're more in touch with local knowledge and conditions. They're more in touch with the communities. They have more political pressure to respond directly to these challenges. And in many ways, they're better equipped to respond to these challenges in terms of emergency planning, prevention efforts that can be made, their ability to legislate in the areas of municipal government, and to mobilize local resources and people to make a difference. So I want to start by talking about what we've done to create more resilient communities. And I think that word resilient or resiliency is one of the themes that we're starting to see emerge, especially out of Hurricane Sandy. The notion of resiliency, that communities can do a number of things together to prepare themselves for unpredictable, extreme, and perhaps more frequent weather events. In Manitoba, because we've had a history of floods, we've built into our southern part of the province very significant changes in our zoning laws, for example, so that all homes have to be built at a certain elevation, 2 feet above the worst event we've ever had, so that we have some ability to withstand future events. 70% of our population lives in the city of Winnipeg. So that city is the major risk to a flood, and we've built a massive floodway around the city, which diverts the water from going through the city, around the city, into the Red River as it flows up to Lake Winnipeg. And then we've worked with communities north of the city to be ready as well. And we have to deal with the reality of ice being on our rivers for months of the year, and that ice can jam up and create flooding unto itself. So we've become the most active jurisdiction on managing ice. Every spring, starting in about a month, we go out and score the ice and break it up into pieces that will move more quickly. And we have these exotic machines called amphibexes. It's like a floating tug with big arms on it that go out there and move the ice around and create channels to allow the water to flow every spring. So we've taken a very active role with our local communities to manage conditions that create flooding. And we've done that with capital investments, we've done that with local leadership, we've done that with new technologies and new techniques to manage things that happen every year in our province, and we've become quite good at it, and we're sharing it with other jurisdictions that have similar challenges. Another dimension of being ready for climate change adaptability is how we educate our young people, how we educate our citizens. And I was very pleased. You never know in your own backyard how you compare to the rest of the world, but we've had a long-term commitment to environmental education for sustainable development in our schools. And when I went to Rio last year, that was recognized, and it was recognized by UNESCO as one of the best curriculums in the world for teaching young people about the environment. And I have to say that in our province, young people are probably ahead of a lot of the adults on their attitudes towards the environment and what can be done, and being committed to recycling and doing a variety of projects. We have modest amounts of money every year in all of our public schools that allow them to do projects, whether it's tree planting, whether it's doing a research, whether it's doing alternative energy projects. And many of our schools have small windmills or solar and tree planting exercises. But the young people are very aware of environmental and sustainable development issues, and that makes them, in my view, global citizens for the future. They have a greater sense of how the world connects together and what they can do to influence that world. And you see parents, you see children telling their parents they ought to be recycling more and pushing them to do that. And I've had lots of parents tell me that. My kids push me harder than I thought to do the right thing around the home, and how to take personal responsibility for what they can do to reduce waste and to do recycling. So that's a good story. And I do think the educational part is very important. There are lots of options out there, including internet options for young people to learn about the environment. If anybody's interested in the curriculum we use, we'd be happy to share it with people. The other thing about Manitoba is because we're at the bottom of all these watersheds, we have this gigantic opportunity to build hydroelectricity. And 98% of our power for domestic consumption is hydroelectricity, so we're blessed by that. But we've had to learn to do it in a different way. We have a lot of aboriginal peoples in our province. It's about 15% of our population. Many of them live in the remote northern communities where the hydro comes from, and we've changed the way we do development in our province. We no longer flood and compensate after the fact and deal with years of bitterness and challenging relationships with our fellow citizens or our First Nations people. We now do partnerships with First Nations communities. They have an opportunity to own equity in the dam. They get first crack at the jobs. We do all the environmental assessments and reviews and mitigation exercises up front, and we extend agreements for cultural and wildlife habitat mitigation for up to 70 years and fund that with First Nations communities. And only after all of those things are dealt with do we go to the environmental reviews on an official level and then actually have a vote in the local Aboriginal communities about whether they want to participate in the project. And the first time I went through this exercise as the Minister of Hydro, I was wondering, should that entire hydro project depend on 2 votes in a small Aboriginal community? The good news is it passed, and we were able to build the project, and it's worked out quite well. But it is a new way of doing development in our province, and it's a new way that respects our constitutional obligations to be respectful of the fact that it's their traditional territory for hunting and fishing, and they have rights there that need to be addressed if you're going to do any energy development projects. And by the way, in most jurisdictions, the way we structure our power rates is that the power rates are lower in the populated areas and more expensive in the less populated areas, and creates a lot of discontent in that regard. We just decided to have one power rate for the whole province, regardless of where you lived. And all of this was possible because we actually own the Crown Corporation. It's a state-owned enterprise that develops our hydro. So it gives us more ability to influence public policy in that regard and ask the board to be more responsive to these concerns. The third issue I wanted to address briefly is food security. And this is a topic that I've been experiencing as I've traveled the world. It is a big issue everywhere we go. Because we've always been a prairie province, that sort of, we used to consider ourselves the bread basket of the world. That's no longer the case. But we have become very good at how to store food, how to manage food, how to make sure we reduce loss in food. And that's technology that we can share with the rest of the world so that we aren't producing things that we're not ultimately able to use to supply or nurture our own proper and healthy diets. We're very advanced on nutraceuticals and functional foods, and we're looking to add value. Agriculture used to be the dominant industry in our province. It's now only directly 3% of what we do, but about 30% of our manufacturing are value-added food products and healthier food products. And so that allows for more entrepreneurship in rural communities and more interesting crops to be grown. And in northern Manitoba, where people never used to believe you could grow a garden, we've developed a healthy foods initiative in the north because of health issues and diabetes issues. We have over 900 community gardens now in northern Manitoba where school children and communities are growing their own gardens, growing their own fresh fruits, fresh vegetables, and getting into some greenhouse projects as well. The fifth topic that I wanted to address is the boreal forest. Manitoba is right in the middle of the largest swath of boreal forest in the world. And we decided when we developed hydro that we weren't going to take the shortest route to market with our transmission because it was going through one of the largest untouched areas of boreal forest in the world. On the west side, the east side of Lake Winnipeg, between the Ontario-Manitoba border, there's a huge piece of southern boreal forest, and we've moved forward on protecting 33,000 square kilometers of that in partnership with First Nations communities, 5 of them in the area that represent well over 90% of the population there. And we've put legislation in place that allows for local planning to be driven by the First Nation communities to lock down their long-term plans for the future of how that area develops and put those into law as community plans and move forward with the UNESCO World Heritage designation on 2 criteria, the boreal forest idea. And when I was in Rio, I was informed by people like the Sierra Club that the boreal forest is a very efficient store of carbon, even more than the Amazon, because it pulls that carbon right down into the roots and creates peat. And we have an enormous amount of peat moss in that part of the province, as well as around the rest of the province. So in partnership with First Nations, we're going for that outstanding universal value to be protected under a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And we fought 2 elections on it with a little bit of trepidation, and we're still here to talk about it. So far so good as we proceed forward. And with those comments, I'll just thank the organizers of this event for the opportunity to address you today and for the opportunity to share with you some of the things we're doing to deal with climate change adaptation and how we can make our communities better places to live and maybe make a contribution to the planet as well. Thank you very much.